Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Leah Cameron, a Toronto writer and producer who most recently worked on CBC's Coroner. Her latest project is the semi-autobiographical web series The Communist Daughter, which she created, ran, and directed. It stars Sophia Banzaf as Dunyasha McDougald, the teenage daughter of two happily married Marxist-Leninists played by Aaron Poole and Jessica Holmes in 1980s Toronto, trying to find her way in high school and Western society at large. It's odd and it's charming, and all 8 episodes are streaming right now on CBC Gem. Leah picked a movie I've been waiting 330 episodes for someone to bring up, Don McKellar's Last Night, the 1998 drama about a handful of Torontonians facing the end of the world. McKellar plays Patrick Wheeler, a man moping through the last 6 hours before an undefined cosmic event extinguishes all life on Earth. Sandra Oh is Sandra, a woman whose only goal is to make it home to her husband. Naturally, fate has other plans. Callum Keith Rennie, Sarah Polley, David Cronenberg, Genevieve Bujold, Jackie Burroughs, and McKellar's partner Tracy Wright turn up as other characters moving through the story, and the beauty of the script is that they all get just as much consideration as the ostensible leads. Subtle and sweet, and strangely upbeat for a movie about the end of everything, Last Night is one of those films that's intensely beloved by people who recognize themselves and their city inside of it. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I actually only saw it for the first time a year or two ago. I think when at the Paradise when they were doing that Toronto Plays Itself series.
Oh, did you stay for the Q&A? I was there. That was me and Don. Yeah. And
it's funny because I was like always thinking that like to me Last Night is kind of like Big Sur. Like Big Sur, California is a place I'd never been to, but people always, when they would talk about it, there'd be like this magic in their eyes where they'd be like, oh, you have to go. And I always felt it was like that with Last Night. I'd never seen it, but people were like, oh, it's so many people I trusted were like, it's such a great movie. And so I just like really enjoyed seeing it at that, at the Paradise that night. And I don't know, there's something about it that I've watched it a few times over the last few months. And I think there's just something I find fascinating about it. I love the specificity of it. I love that it's unabashedly, like I wouldn't even say Canadian, it's unabashedly Torontonian to me.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who loves specificity. And there's something like I feel seen when I watch that movie because like I'm from a waspy Canadian Toronto background. And like, I don't know, there's something with the way people talk. There's something with the understated humor that like I rarely see on screen. And it's really satisfying.
Yeah.
So,
well, the Anglo thing is really unique. I don't know that I hate it when people refer to filmmakers by their first names, but I actually do know Don a little, so that's inevitable. It's going to happen. But the fact that his parents are very English and he has internalized so much of that, it kind of makes him the perfect person to capture Toronto. And even diversity is still a thing in his movies. He doesn't ignore it. It's not overtly white, but there is a strain of that runs through the city, as you said, that he nails. He absolutely gets it. Like the idea that his parents are just the right kind of repressed and the kids aren't, the generational conflict that's going on, and the way it radiates out.
Like that his mom wants to have that Christmas dinner. Like there's just so many, just like the way they talk and like, oh my God, I know those people. And like, which is rare to like even... Like, I feel like just like the way people talk, I'm like, I recognize that kind of like intonation or turn of phrase. It's just like really well observed. And and just like even the box of stuff that his mom is giving them of, because she wants to like remember all their happy times. So, like, there's just, I don't know, there's so many great details where it's like, oh, that's probably something my mother would do. But so I love the specificity of it, but I also love that like it's sort of a big idea done in this Canadian way that I think is also really funny. Like the fact that it is like the last night on Earth and that everyone just sort of accepts it because there's nothing they can do to prevent it. Like it's not like an American movie where they're like an action hero would like save the day. And to me, so I admire it for that reason. And then also the fact that like it is a high concept in a way, the end of the world, but it's very smart the way it's pulled off. and it's completely believable to me, you know.
Yeah.
And even just like the thing with the light, where at least the first time I saw it, I didn't notice really until a certain point. I'm like, oh wait, it's still bright out, you know? And just that as a device for that and they don't really explain it, but that there's something off, something planetary that's off. That I just think that's such an economical way to do that. And it's fun watching it with other people because they have the same reaction where they finally realize that it's still bright out and they're like, and then it makes you feel smart as a viewer because you feel like you're putting that together, you know?
Yeah. The other thing that I think makes me feel smart now is it's not even smart. It's like a warm, reassuring moment where you realize that his casting instincts were so good that everyone in that film is now someone, even people you might not have recognized in passing have gone on to full careers. I mean, Sandra Oh is obviously the biggest name by dint of American success, but you've just got this wall of talent that just keeps trooping through. And also somehow feeling really Torontonian, really comfortingly local. Like just the fact that David Cronenberg is the voice of the Hydro Man, because he is inherently soothing, even though he's thanking people for staying with them until the end of their lives.
I know. And he's like being dutiful. Like, I also love that it's like this sort of like waspy Canadian sense of duty that he seems to have to like, I don't know, just there's something that it's like, just like doing the right thing that reminds me, like my mom won't even steal a postage stamp without feeling bad. You know what I mean?
Right.
That conscientiousness. I feel like I think the first time I saw it, I didn't realize that it was David Cronenberg. And I think that was like genius casting for sure.
He'd also done one of Don's shorts. He's either a narrator or a presence or possibly both in a short film he made called Blue.
Okay.
And I remember thinking at the time that it was almost like listening to someone narrate a nature documentary. It's about pornography, but it's just this magnificent use of Cronenberg's calm. I think he described himself as a human entomologist or something.
Amazing. Oh my God, it's so funny.
That it's just so casual and observant and normal until you actually realize who's saying it and why.
That's really funny and like kind of restrained.
Oh, he's so calm and relaxing. He really is. I just I rewatched Nightbreed a little while ago for another episode of this podcast, and it was just one of those things where it's like it doesn't feel like perverse casting anymore because Cronenberg has been acting here and there for 30 years now. But at the time, and even in last night, it was a novelty that he was in it at all.
Right.
But it's just. Oh no! Sorry. Go ahead.
No, did Cronenberg have acting training before? Like, I just think of him as a director. So I
don't think so. He pops up, he bursts through a wall and shivers because there was no one else available to do it, I think was the explanation. But no, he wasn't, he wasn't trained or doing anything, equity wise as a filmmaker. He even cut himself out of The Fly. He appeared in a dream sequence as the gynecologist delivering the monster or the OBGYN.
That's so funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But there's something about the way he meshes with Tracy Wright too, which is just so calm and perfect.
Yeah, totally. And I think, another thing I like about it is I feel like it's a movie that I can rewatch because it is really subtly told. Like it's deceivingly like well crafted. Like it seems simple, but I think the script is really, really well crafted. And so there's just stuff that I pick up on the second and third viewing, like about her character. Like the first time around, I think I kind of got that she was into her boss, but the second time it like really became clear, and then like, I don't know if we're allowed to give spoilers, but her arc.
It's a 20-year-old movie. We can probably.
Yeah. Fair enough. Like just certain things that make it a pleasure to rewatch, like just how, I guess in the opening scene or the Christmas dinner, because like the main character's Patrick's parents are having like a fake Christmas dinner because it's the last night before the world ends. And so they want to celebrate Christmas to make it like a joyous occasion, I guess.
Right.
And I just love how there's that moment where like the main character, Patrick, sort of like makes fun of the fireplace for not being a real fireplace. And it fits with his character because he's like an architect who seems to be sort of a bit dismissive of a lot of things.
Yeah.
But then later you're like, oh, that's the perfect way to set up the gas fireplace and the gas company. So that later when the countdown happens and the gas goes out, you're just like, genius. Like, so genius.
Yeah, he just finds these little floating metaphors that just pop in the course of it. Even the sense of Jennifer. Yeah. She's treated as sort of a rave kid almost before there were those.
That would make sense because it's done in like 97, 98.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the way that the movie employs her. I love the way that it has tendrils, that we follow individual storylines that interweave and it's like roots in a garden or something. I'm using a terrible metaphor for this, but it just feels like it's constantly entangling itself in other people's stories so that when one character we know glimpses another one, we're not just thinking about those two characters, but everyone around them, everybody in that scene and where they came from. And, the way there isn't a lot of violence, but there is a mob always somewhere rolling around. So there's a sense of tension and threat.
Totally. And it's like set up at the beginning. It's like
they turn over the car. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then the father mentions all the looting going on. Yeah. And Sandra's car gets turned over. Yeah. And in terms of it's based on what you were saying about sort of like the tendrils of it and that structure, I find it really interesting. Like I personally am just like really drawn to ensemble pieces. I don't know why. I love them. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, but I was thinking about the fact that like that movie came out in like what, like 97, 98?
98, yeah.
98. It seems like there was a lot of movies then that were ensemble pieces.
Oh, yeah.
It seemed to be in the air. And I'm always curious, like when certain stories are in the air, why that is. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, because there was like Reservoir Dogs kind of had, I guess that's a bit earlier, but still.
Yeah.
It had that sort of structure and yeah.
Yeah. A part of it was that television wasn't doing it, that the art had sort of drifted away in drama. Everything was more family-based and focused. ER, I think, was the one that broke the mold, and that would have been, 94? When it suddenly introduced a big ensemble cast. But in movies, this is awful, but it was Harvey Weinstein. Like the reason that ensemble films were so popular was, I think it started with, predated him. I think it started with Jarmusch in the 80s. Things like Mystery Train or Stranger Than Paradise and indies there were a lot of indies that were doing that just because it was easier to, you don't have a movie star to pay for. You have a bunch of smaller up and coming actors and a bunch of locations and you can make the cities attractive and all of that. But then the Weinstein brothers, both of them just figured out, remember that wave of movies in the mid 90s and late 90s where you basically marketed all of them exactly the same way with a bunch of young, attractive actors in like black t-shirts and with white, basically what I'm wearing right now.
Formative years. Yeah.
Like Dean Koontz's Phantoms and all the Halloween sequels that the Dimension produced. What would happen would be that if you sold a picture to Harvey Weinstein, he would book your actor for something else almost immediately. Shakespeare in Love is probably the pinnacle of it, where, it is theoretically it's a two-hander, but it's got Ben Affleck and it's got Jeffrey Rush and it's got Judi Dench and they were all doing 3 other films for the Weinstein brothers at the same time. And that's just what happened. Every spring and every fall, there'd be a romantic comedy. And every Christmas, there'd be a drama, like some kind of Oscar bait thing. Music of the Heart with Meryl Streep was another one of those, where he just cranked them out. And I think part of it was that it was cheaper because there was never one big star, but also the concepts could be very, very simple. They could just be, Next Stop Wonderland or some romantic comedy for Brad Anderson, or, hey, Michelle Williams isn't doing anything for 6 months. Let's plug her into, actually a Halloween movie. So that's a bad example, but that's how it worked. And that was sort of the default mode of the indie film.
Yeah. I guess that's so interesting. I hadn't really thought of it from like, sort of like
The cynical exploitation of actors' perspective.
no, well, but sort of like the more business side of it. I hadn't thought of it in that. I was taking, like, I guess I would have been in high school at the time, and my really good friend and I took a filmmaking class at the AGO.
Oh yeah.
And I remember everyone wanted to do ensemble stuff. And I remember the teacher was like, why is this a thing right now? So I guess that's why I remember kind of wondering, because it was true. Like, and I don't know, maybe people were mimicking Reservoir Dogs or something, but like at my high school, students were all writing plays that had sort of ensemble casts like that. And anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a way to use most of your friends too, right? To get everybody, nobody feels left out.
Yes.
Yeah. And at the Q&A, I'm at the Paradise, I'm pretty sure Don's argument for casting himself was that he just couldn't find anybody else, that he wasn't looking to star in the film. And if you watch his scenes, you can see the coverage sort of goes away from him more often than not, because he wasn't that confident in his ability as an actor. That's
interesting. I feel like his character is really compelling just because it is sort of, like he has sort of a passive protagonist, which is to me what kind of makes the joke of the premise so funny. Like this idea that Canadians would sit back and not sort of stop the world from ending. But I also think it's really effective too, because that character is so restrained, so that at the end, when him and Sandra talk and he shares that he like lost this woman and he opens up, it's even like more effective, I think, because he's been so restrained up to that point. It's just really, I don't know. I find that it like really makes me, it's very effective. It's like very emotional. And I think that's another thing I like about it as a film is it's like it's funny, but it's also touching and it's absurd in places. And so I think that's really, I don't know how he did it, but that mix of tones, like it all seems to like work really well together. And I was even thinking about the Guantanamera song, like the Pete Seeger album. Like, I love how when it's like first introduced, it's in that box of like things that his mother gave him, like of presents from Christmases past or like things from his past that to remember. And it's like passed off as a joke kind of, and he sings it super awkwardly, Sandra Oh, which is like a really funny moment when he sings a song. Then you see it. And this is what I mean about it being subtle. I didn't notice the first time I watched it, but then when you cut back to his family home, those older women are watching these like home videos on the TV screen near the end, and you see him as a kid unwrap the album.
Yeah.
So then it's like this touching thing. And then that's the song that's like played at the end, like at the end of the movie when the world's going to end. And so I just love how like this one detail is like funny in one moment, like touching in another, sort of like romantic in another. It's just like, yeah.
It's like facets being turned over in a gem or something. You just, depending on how the light hits it, right? It has a different response.
Yeah. And again, I think it makes you feel like smart as an audience member. It's like, there's a directing teacher of mine who, one of the things he says is that I really believe is that he thinks that cinema is really effective when it's sort of like 2 + 2 = 5. Like you put some elements out there and you let the like audience members connect the dots, And so, and I feel like this film does that really, really well, where it's letting you put together, it's an ensemble piece of certain characters cross paths, right? So when Don McKellar's character, they go to his friend's house to get Sandra Oh's character that green car, right? And then she's driving the car to try to get across the city to see her husband. And then she's mobbed. And this man someone's about to attack her. And then this man comes up and like picks up a shovel and like smashes the guy who's going to attack her in the head. And then you realize that actually is Patrick's sister's boyfriend
right,
who just saved Sandra. And Sandra doesn't know that, and the boyfriend doesn't know that, but we know that as as the audience. And so like, I just think those kinds of things are so satisfying because you're like, oh, I'm smart. I'm piecing this together. And it makes you a participant. It makes you a participant in the movie, which I really love that kind of experience as a viewer. You know,
it's also reassuring on repeat viewings that all of the people that Patrick interacts with the exception of Craig, who is absolutely just a sleazebag, are good people. Like we get to see that Jennifer picked a good dude for her boyfriend, that he's willing to do that and jump in and save someone. And it speaks to, I've been trying to articulate this for months now, because that last night screening was January of last year. And, 2 months later, we found out that actually Canadians are not all capable of banding together and doing the right thing in times of crisis. And the optimism that he has, that McKellar's movie has, as opposed to what Patrick has, which is kind of this cracked sense of hope that he refuses to engage with. But the movie is genuinely optimistic about the end of the world, which was something that we talked about it on stage, I'm sure, because I always ask him about it. It's absolutely fascinating to me that, this was part of a larger project that I'm going to butcher the title of the company. There's a French production company called Hoecourt that commissioned, I think there were 8 originally. There were only 6 produced. Most of them are short. They're under an hour. Hal Hartley made the American one, The Book of Life. Simon Lang did one. I think The Hole was the contribution, but they were all about the millennium. And Last Night was the one that has endured, I think, because it's not a metaphor. Like, it full on engages with the subject. And it's the only one of the 6 that does. And it's incredibly, of all of them, it's also the most positive. It's the one that thinks on some level it's going to be okay. Death isn't presented as something horrifying or something to be dreaded. It's just, and I think it's because of the Canadianness of it. I think it's because the resignation has long since passed and we're into acceptance. He said he never explains anything specifically. He wants the implication to be that there's something wrong with the sun. It may not be anything we did. It's just something that's happening. Yeah. But whatever it is has been coming long enough that everybody has already gone through the worst of it. And so what you're seeing are a bunch of people just sort of shambling towards the end. But because it's Toronto, we're doing it together. Yeah. And that's beautiful. I don't know that he knows how optimistic that is. It's certainly not now, not after the last 10 years in Toronto. But there was a point in time, where the province was beating the crap out of us. Mike Harris and Ernie Eves were making terrible decisions that made things worse for the city. And we genuinely did feel like it was just us against them. And so for this movie to come out at that point, of course it's optimistic, because you have to believe that. Otherwise, it's just a Mad Max movie. Like, it's just people running around getting sunburned and dying.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because in a way I was sort of thinking about it and how it really sort of looks at like different ways that people could want to spend their last night on Earth, right? Yeah. And I think it kind of hits a lot of like the major themes is like, do you believe in God and do you pray? Do you not believe in that at all? And do you just want to be by yourself because you've already lost somebody? So what is it? Does any of it have any meaning? Do you want to party like the sister? Like it's the greatest New Year's of all time. Do you, Sandra Oh's character, I guess, is more romantic. She wants to be with a man she loves, or do you want to have sex or lose your virginity?
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of great. Like, and it's subtle, but when you step back and like, it's subtle in the execution, but I feel like when you step back and look at it, you're like, these are like all the big themes of like, and I don't know why he chose that song, Guantanamera, but it's like, that song is very much about like choosing to be a good human being, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end of it all, were you a good person?
I wrote a piece for CBC, the Joanna Schneller's show, the filmmakers in the first season did an episode on Last Night, and I was part of the panel. And they asked me to write the essay, the accompanying essay, because the critic always is supposed to do that. And I realized that I'd never really written about, I reviewed it when it came out, but I'd never really written about it at length. And this was almost 20 years later. It was 19 years after the release. And that was basically what I came down to as well. It's a thought experiment in its way, but it's asking the audience, like, what would you do? And then I realized that that question is the question that every one of McKellar's movies is about. It's always about personal action. Like everything he does comes back to it. Even through Black Spruce is ultimately about one sister choosing to go and look for another. And, you can argue that every dramatic narrative is based on action, on someone deciding to take action, but there are plenty of stories where people don't act. And this one, Last Night, is the one that crystallizes and forms it at the same time. It's the best expression of his thing because everyone is constantly being asked that question, and how they respond dictates literally the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really,
It's heavier than it looks, right? Like the whole movie, the minute you start thinking about it, just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. I love that about it.
Totally. And that there's it's like, the dialogue is like spare. Like, I just feel like it allows you room as a viewer to keep like peeling back the onion, which is like why I think it's a movie I can rewatch. And I think, and like I was saying earlier, like before I saw the movie, anyone I talked to whose opinion I respected would be like, oh, it's so great. And they just like have this look in their eyes where I'm like, okay, I need to see this film. And I think it's because it engages the audience in that way, that it lets you, it asks you to think about these things, and
it doesn't insist on anything, right? Like it doesn't have a message, I don't think. It doesn't press one down on you. You're left in the void. You're just left to contemplate it. I loved that experience with the audience. From the conversation afterwards, it felt like about half the room had seen it and half were coming to it fresh. And just because it's been so hard to find for so long.
Yeah.
Which is just insanity to me. The idea that, I mean, I said it at the time, like I've been trying to get it into the Criterion Collection. I think it should be there.
It should be there. It's not, huh?
No, it might show up on the Criterion channel, but for years and years, it was owned by Lionsgate and Universal, and Lionsgate didn't have a relationship they still don't have a relationship with Criterion. So they might sometimes license a digital version, but not a disc. I don't know why, and it's very frustrating. But that was like pretty much from the get-go something I was trying to accomplish just because I know them fairly well.
That's
like,
cool.
You don't have a lot of Canadian movies, and just Cronenberg. Maybe this would be good. Look who's in it. Everyone's in it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like I'm taking a directing class online right now with a teacher who taught me in film school, and he's based in LA. So it's one of the great things about the pandemic is that I can actually take a class with him because he's offering it on Zoom.
Oh, cool.
And I told him that he needs to see it. And it's just like, it's interesting to me because it's sort of like this cult movie, right? That like, and I described it to him as like, I was like, it's like Antonioni's Red Desert, but a comedy set in Toronto about the end of the world. Like that's what it feels like to me.
That's about right. It is so specific, I think, that it could have only ever become a cult film. Like you can't make this movie happen. You couldn't make it a hit. It was like the Toronto Film Critics Association voted it the Canadian Film of the Year in '98, which was great. Which Don has repeatedly pointed out at our galas that was before we started awarding the ridiculous prize. So he just got a handshake, and he's still mad. I think he's still mad about it.
He's like mad about it.
I mean, he's the best person. He's a Toastmaster. Like he really is the best person to have in one of those situations because he will find a way to work the room and poke at it and make it personal. He's wonderful. And this movie has all of those things. Like it is Don McKellar. And that's, I think, why it could never be massive because it's such a specific Canadian taste.
Well, and that's what I think is interesting is like, I have this, like, I love to kind of compare Canadian and American reviews sometimes. Oh, yeah. And I find it funny because I think if you read American reviews, you can tell they're just a bit confused by it. Like there's sort of like Roger Ebert or whoever wrote the review for Ebert just sounds like slightly confused by it. Whereas like, because to me, there's like these references you can only get if you're Canadian or you're from Toronto. Like, just like the fact that like Mel Lastman Square is mentioned and that there's like everybody's turned up to play like Randy Bachman songs together, or like, but like, to me, it just reminds me of being in high school and like it's New Year's and you're like, the movie has a bit of that feeling of it's like, it's New Year's and you're just like wanting to find the best party, but you can't. And like one of your friends wants to go to Mel Lastman Square and that's kind of shitty. And you're trying to like get a cab. Like, it has a bit of that kind of feeling to it. And so it feels so specifically Toronto to me. And then like, those jokes about Mel Lastman Square, and those are kinds of things that I think, unless you're from here, it would kind of go over your head, you know?
Yeah. I wish it was me. I cannot take credit for this, but someone did once say everyone in it is like someone you would see at in the line for a Tragically Hip concert. It might have been Dawn, actually.
That's interesting.
But it is like, it's the most Anglo-Canadian thing. You know, there's like Arsene's there and Sarah Polley is there.
Yeah.
And, that Calvin Keith Rennie, he was on Battlestar Galactica for a while. Of course he's Canadian. Like, all these little things that slot into place. And you know, Callum was in Hardcore Logo, and they all had credibility at the time. Like, they were all just coming out of a bunch of other stuff. I don't think they'd made Twitch City yet. So Don was probably the one that no one knew.
Yeah.
But if you were in Toronto, you knew who he was because he was this emerging filmmaker. And to see it, I just, how many first features are this well formed and this and have this sort of goodwill? The only other, it wasn't a first feature, but the only other Canadian film I've seen that has replicated this experience was Trigger. It was Bruce McDonald's movie with Molly Parker, who's like notably absent in this from everybody else. Somehow they just didn't have her yet. She was in Vancouver doing Suspicious River or something like that. We missed the window.
Yeah.
But if she was in this, it would be the most Canadian project ever made.
Yeah.
But when Trigger, of course, was made when Tracy Wright got sick, and that was her last hurrah, really. It's this labor of love in the same way, and a lot of the same people show up. Callum's in it. Sarah Polley shows up for 2 seconds, and there's just this sense of like, it feels like a bookend in a weird way to me, and you know, I can't say I ever knew Tracy Wright well. We live in the same neighborhood, and we would run it. Like, Kate and I would be out walking our dog, and we would pass Dawn and Tracy on their way to something, and we would nod and smile. And then it all just happened so fast that it was like she was ripped away. And in some strange way, having Last Night be there and showing her as a reactive actor, like just letting us watch her do very little and so much at the same time, it's such a pleasure to be able to revisit that and see who she was and what she did. And then something like Trigger, where it's much more verbal and she's giving a full performance, is great as well. But you just, in both films, you feel the goodwill of everybody pulling the rope to make the thing happen.
Yeah. And I feel like that when there's an alchemy like that, you can see it on screen.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. And I think that's a rare thing. And I mean, I could imagine it. I wasn't on set, but I feel that when I see it, like it feels like there was like some kind of alchemy happening and a trust, you know, between the people that made the film. I haven't seen Trigger, but I'll put it on my list.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously sadder now than it was at the time. It was melancholy, and now it's full on tragic, but it's still good. It's just it's an encapsulation of talent and potential, and why someone was as well loved as she was, I guess, and all of that stuff. And again, because it's a Toronto project, you just, you know, you come away knowing so much more about it and feeling so personally invested. I wonder how a Vancouver apocalypse movie would play for me. Like, I'm sure I would still be, my heart would be open to it, and I would still know most of the actors involved from decades of their work, but it wouldn't be like, it's not the same. That streetcar is a real image, right? Like,
I know that streetcar image is like, well, and also then like pushing over the streetcar too.
Yeah, we would, like, that's rude. We would never do that.
So rude. I know. It's like so visceral and great, but like, yeah, it's funny. And like that streetcar, that image, like that wide shot of Sandra Oh walking toward camera with like the streetcar like left of frame and she's sort of balancing right of frame, and then you've got the tracks like 1 point perspective.
Yeah,
is like, amazing. And that's what makes me think of Red Desert. It like makes me think of the woman in the green coat.
Sure.
Walking around this apocalyptic gray sort of, yeah, it's really iconic. I like posting film grabs that I like. And I posted that one the other day. And so many people who haven't seen Last Night were like, what is this? What movie is this from?
Yeah.
And they're like, and Sandra Oh is in it?
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember, I know Dawn told the story. I think it was when we covered it for Now. I mean, again, right? Like Last Night has been in and out of my life for as long as it's existed. You can't be a Toronto entertainment writer and not touch on it here and there. But Now magazine did like the 25 best Toronto films, and Last Night was number one, rightly so. And so I didn't actually get to write about the movie, but I did interview Don about it. And he said that image, which became the poster, like the streetcar and Sandra, he had to fight for that because nobody else knew what it meant.
Really?
Like, the Toronto streetcar, people asked him if it was science fiction. And he said, well, it's science fiction because it's the end of the world. But no, those are real. That's like, it's not a shuttlecraft.
Right. Because people associate it with like San Francisco or other cities. Is that why maybe?
Yeah, it looked futuristic. It looked weird and wrong.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that our new streetcars are even more futuristic. Like,
yes.
They don't look real.
Yeah, they don't. I know. And I think that, I get really passionate about showing Toronto for Toronto. Or any place for itself. Like I just think that there's something so great about the specificity of any place, you know? And I think I just have a theory that a lot of Canadians don't know what here is sometimes when they like, and I mean, we're seeing Canada playing itself more and more, which is great. But I feel like just like an ear for the way people talk, or I love that kind of stuff, you know, like I never wanted to go to small town Texas until I watched Friday Night Lights, you know, and I don't care about football at all, but there's a specificity to that show that like, I think makes it really compelling. And yeah, so I just get really excited when I see that kind of specificity on screen. And I don't care if it confuses people about a streetcar. So what? They can learn.
Yeah, exactly. And film is a teacher. That's what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
So to that end, I guess, is there anything of Last Night that's worked its way into your own projects? I mean, have you referenced it or drawn on it? It seems like the kind of movie that would be hard to pull from directly just because, you know, you'd have to be working in the same genre almost.
Yeah, I wouldn't say for The Communist Daughter that there's anything. No, I wouldn't say for The Communist Daughter that there's anything specifically that I've pulled from Last Night. I actually think I watched Last Night after I'd already written the pilot for this and after I'd already conceived of The Communist Daughter. So no, but I am working on something. I mean, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to jinx it, but
sure.
A feature film that all I'll say is I want to set it in Toronto in the winter, and I want it to feature a lot of brutalist utopian buildings.
Yeah,
that I
that's
think
true.
Are like a really Toronto thing.
We have not talked about the layout. Sean McCalliff listens to this. He's going to be so mad at me. The Jackie Burroughs running tour through all those amazing buildings, which I will occasionally, because I live in Little Italy and I get up to the annex every now and then, and you just see 3 or 4 of them. And it's just like, there's nowhere else that could produce these strange, the flying saucer one on Walnut.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it's like, I think what's so funny to me is like, I lived in LA for like 5 years. And it's one of those things that when you come back, like I'm from here, and when you come back, you start to see things like with a fresh perspective. And when I shot the teaser for The Communist Daughter, I was just like talking about the aesthetic of the show with one of my really good friends. And we were talking about the fact that Canadian cities have this like, you know, Montreal has it as well, like this utopian architecture that is not an American thing.
Yeah. And
it's funny to me in a show called The Communist Daughter, because it's about my dad being a commie in Canada. And Americans think we're all, you know, or Fox News viewers think we're all pinkos. So to me, it's like this visual joke of like this architecture that has this slightly like Soviet feeling. It's Canadian.
Yeah.
There's something I think is really funny about that. And it didn't end up in the web series because, you know, we just couldn't afford to be like, to put that in there. But it's something that's obsessed me after the fact. So I'm like, I kind of want to do something that's set in like a weird Soviet Toronto. Like, Kieslowski's The Decalogue, but a comedy set in Toronto in the winter.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
Well, we'll see. I haven't written it yet.
No, like you say The Decalogue, and all I think of are the apartment buildings. I mean, of course, you could do that here.
Oh yeah, like Yonge and Davisville. I don't know. There's like this set of apartment buildings I'm obsessed with because it looks like you're in Poland, and there's like these weird like sculptures outside and like fountains that have this like Soviet feel, and I'm like, yeah. So I'm like thinking of.
Are these the ones on Lascelles? Because I lived there.
Yes, yeah, they're the ones on Lascelles.
Yeah, I lived there for 10 years
all the time. Yeah,
I was there from 93 to 2003, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great because, I mean, they're huge apartments. I had a 2-bedroom with a massive office. It was wonderful. And they weren't expensive. And they were a good 15 minutes from anything because you could not access them from Yonge. You had to walk in from a side street. And yeah, it felt like you were walking into 1957 no matter when you got there.
I know, right? And I'm like obsessed with them. I've been photographing them and like trying to think. I'm like, do you know that weird structure that's outside one of them? It's like, I'm obsessed with it. I'm like, that was
my building was the one in the middle of those three.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my boyfriend lives the one to the very east, I guess. And I'm obsessed with that platform. I don't know what it is that I want to shoot there, but I want to stage something on that weird platform because it's just like, it's so strange to me.
Yeah, it was a fountain, but it never worked when I was there.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's so great. It's such a tiny city.
No, for sure. But it's like, that's the kind of, and I think it's also when you live somewhere else and you come back, like I would come back from LA and everyone, like I'd be at Davisville Station. I'd be like, why is this not interior? Like, why is this an outdoor station?
Yeah.
Why? It's cold here 6 months of the year. And everybody's got like chapsticks and is trying to like moisturize themselves. It's just like this thing where you're trying to get like moisture back into your body for like 6 months of the year and buying humidifiers that break and like, I don't know. There's like comedy to me and all that. And like, I still remember coming home and it was one of those days where there was a ton of snow. And like, I walked down like the main street near my parents' house and went into this pastry shop and it was like howling wind and the snow was like blowing sideways. And one guy came into the pastry shop behind me and he's like, well, totally cheerful. It's like, it's not that bad. You just have to walk backwards. And I'm like, the stuff that we justify that we are like, this after living in California, I was like, the stuff that we are okay with so that we can call this place home is like funny to me. Yeah.
It's wonderful to see anything that celebrates Toronto as Toronto because we're so used to not having that. Like, I'm the film critic who giggled all through Death Wish 4, where they tried to make the same intersection at Bay and Richmond. Like they tried to represent that as 4 different locations in New York City because that kind of looks like Manhattan there when the light is right.
Right.
And to just see Toronto be Toronto and Torontonians be Torontonians and acknowledge that we are kind of weird and specific here.
Yeah, totally.
That's something, I mean, we need more of it. He did it with Twitch City immediately after, and which is as accurate, like tonally accurate, a portrait of Kensington Market as I think I've ever seen, and I lived there for 13 years.
Yeah.
And it's in a weird way, like if last night, like it did get out, it played internationally, but it didn't register on the same scale. Like it feels very much like a homegrown treasure that we keep close to our hearts, and then like you, we get to introduce people to it later. It's the kind of thing I was just saying on Twitter today on some unrelated thing. Like you cannot make a cult movie on purpose. I think you can try, but everyone can feel it. And they play as needy somehow or overly, like it's all just too much. And if you do something like this and it's quiet and it's honest and it somehow rings true with people, it never goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if something just comes from an honest place, then it's not a guarantee it will be evergreen, but I think a lot of like evergreen, so I hate that. It's such a marketing word, but like,
I know, yeah.
I mean, but I think things that do stand the test of time often is just because it came from like an honest place of some kind.
Yeah. I mean, he is making a movie about mortality and legacy and continuity, even though it never really comes out and says so. It's always there. That kind of anxiety is something that feels very specifically Toronto too.
In what way?
Well, just the sense that the city is always changing I mean, even more so now this year with everything, you know, like restaurants going out of business and everything shutting down. But Toronto is sort of at war with itself. We want to be progressive, but we keep electing conservatives. We don't want to have that conversation, you know, about the 30% of people who will always back the right-wing guy, no matter what's going on. And it's always a guy. And how we keep generating that. And we're supposed to know better. And then, you know, Rob Ford kind of ended that superiority complex. But the result of Rob Ford was that we got John Tory, who is really not very good at anything other than, you know, looking like a mayor, which was how he got elected. His whole thing, his whole platform was, you know, elect me, I'm not him.
Yeah.
And then things haven't gotten better, really. We have counselors who are trying to fight the good fight. But I mean, obviously I'm a full-on left-wing pinko. I have the button I have the button from 2010 from Spacing. But we are we are convinced that we are better than this. And over again, we're proven that collectively we're not really. Yeah,
but I think that goes back to the mega city and the fact that the power now lies in the 905 in terms of, and that's culturally has different needs than the downtown does, right? So, I think that's too bad, right? Because Crombie was like an example of like such a progressive mayor.
Yeah, and that was in the 80s.
I know.
Yeah. But that's what I mean about last night. Like it rises up out of that period when the mega city was happening and we were all pushing back against it and trying to, like, it's the version where we win, like we are Toronto the good, but then we all get wiped off the face of the earth.
Right. I never thought about it like that way, but that's interesting in terms of the context of what was going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reason I wrote my show is my dad was always running, never winning, but always running for election, and very involved. So I remember that mega city period very well. I think he had a shirt that said mega shitty, and he was very adamant about not wanting, fighting amalgamation and keeping garbage collection public and like all of those city issues. It is an interesting thing how it feels like the city has changed in a lot of ways. Like, like there's that condo going up on DuPont called Bianca.
Oh, yeah.
And I just like to, I don't know, I always imagine it being like staffed by like 11 Ivanka Trumps. Like I just imagine if you go into the sales center, like that's who would be behind the counter. And it makes me sad because that weird psychotherapy center is being torn down, which is like a remnant of like 60s Toronto. Like it's like this weird space where you go inside and it's like everything is wood paneled and it's a kind of place where there'd be like dusty spider plants like hanging everywhere. And I feel like you're just seeing less and less of that, like the planetarium, I think is being taken down now too.
Yeah. I saw the plans the other day, or the artist rendition, I guess it was. And it looks fine, but it won't be the planetarium where someone once made a short film and referred to it as the Canadian Egg Repository and got the biggest laugh from an audience that I've ever heard. Because only we know that it isn't. And that sounds completely believable.
It's amazing.
Yeah. That was a different time. I really am curious to see where we go after this as Toronto. Because I want it to be worth saving. Like I want us to be worth saving as a species, which I think is the message of the movie as well, that, we aren't, at least this one wasn't our fault at the end of last night. Whatever happens,
right.
It wasn't a war. It wasn't a plague that someone unleashed. It's just the world going away.
It's just happening.
Yeah. And that, again, like that's the most Canadian thing that you can imagine.
Yeah. You're just kind of like powerless in the whole thing. You just kind of have to go along for the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Guess that's what's going on now. At least we can have a sing along.
Yeah. It's fun talking about, it's just interesting to see like why certain movies compel us, like why we're drawn to certain stories.
My thanks to Leah Cameron, whose delightful new web series, The Communist Daughter, is available in its entirety right now on CBC Gem to stream for free. Go watch that. And then, maybe look up Sophia Banzaf and Aaron Poole's episodes of the podcast. They were pretty good. You can find Leah on Twitter at Leah F. Cameron, all one word, and you can still find Last Night on DVD out there somewhere, used mostly, in a really disappointing transfer. It's also streaming on Amazon Prime Video and Crave in Canada, though neither of those transfers is the restoration either, although apparently it's in HD if you buy or rent it on Amazon in the US or Apple TV in Canada. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting a bunch of podcasts these days and writing the weekly Now Streaming newsletter, to which you can subscribe at nowtoronto.substack.com. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Stay inside, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out. I'll see you next time.